The second form of emergence that I want to look at is the emergent citizenship, because that's a huge aspiration to become full citizen. A lot of literature on citizenship has basically tried to look at forms of citizenship and the fact that from the idea of individual rights, there are social rights, and that increasingly citizenship has become what Nicholas Rose calls a biological citizenship as the state has become a biopolitical state. What I find is that it's not so much the forms of citizenship that are so significant, but how is it that citizenship is claimed? What are the ways in which one learns to claim citizenship? And I think that this is very intimately related with the fact that the state is present in the form of what I call non-named laws. Now, I know to some this will seem a contradiction in terms, how can there be a law which is not named? But this is precisely the kind of realm in which, again, the locality that I showed you, along with many other localities, are in fact not recognized localities. That is, these are typically localities which come up because 50 years ago, a steel mill was put up over there. There was demand for labor. People came from villages and did this settlement. The government encouraged it because labor was necessary, right? And then they occupy the land, what they call kabza, which is just to occupy. But this is very interesting that once they occupy the land, they have a right to go to the Supreme Court or to, to the High Court and say that if they have lived over there for this, if they can show residency and if they can show that they belong either to scheduled castes or scheduled tribes or, are extremely poor, then the state does not have a right to actually expel them from there unless alternate housing can be provided. So in this particular case, for example, several times they have actually got stay orders from the High Court to say that they have a right to stay there, not because they legally bought the land, but because of a previous Supreme Court decision which says that the constitutional right to life includes the right to have a livelihood, and they can't have a right to livelihood if they do not stay where they have actually occupied the land. So there is a very interesting way in which the state itself overrides its own law. And therefore, in very interesting ways, forms of certain kinds of legality develop. For example, it's quite frequent to sell your jhuggi, or there are people who own, jhuggi is the shanty, they own it and they are actually able to rent it and so on, right? So in some ways, exception, as I'll show you in a minute, plays a very different role than the idea of exception in the Schmidt-Agamben kind of model. Because in the Schmidt-Agamben kind of model, the capacity to declare an exception is the sovereign has a right to declare exception because he's not under the law. But if you see what the exception does, it basically reduces people to bare life. What's interesting is that there's a completely different conception of exception and life, which is operative over here, so that the assumption that life overrides law, and therefore exception is precisely that in which the life of the community has to be preserved. And I give you this one example. I'm sorry I don't have a translation of this. This is a ration card. And where the, on this side, it says happy family on the top. Here is the picture of the person who has it. What's interesting is that where you can see the star, it says this is not to be recognized as a valid ration card, right? So imagine this: the government is giving a document on its own name. People have been getting, if you saw the transactions, they have been getting kerosene and rice and sugar for more than 5 or 6 years on this ration card, yet the government says this is not to be recognized as a ration card. So clearly, in some ways, this is an exception, but it is an exception which and it is an exception in relationship to biological life, but it is not about bare life. It's not a reduction of the person into nothing else but biological life which the state can, in fact, appropriate.